Have to do my thing, I guess. So, welcome. Glad you didn't get soaked coming in yet. Maybe on the way out. I'm just being hopeful about these things. But glad to see each and every one of you here. We have a few announcements to make this evening. Beverly Brown had 2 stents put in her heart last week, but we're so glad to see her here this evening and doing well enough. The boys have taken good enough care, or she's had to get around to make sure they do take care of things. Linda Azell is scheduled to get a pacemaker next Thursday. She is here tonight, but she's in one of the last classes of the ladies' class back there. Ray Zell's here. Good to see Ray. And he's set for surgery to insert a heart loop recorder under his skin on the 18th. So they're trying to kind of compete with each other, who can get procedures, how often, frequency, how serious, all sorts of things. Scott Ely is in Luzon, Philippines for a mission trip, so we want to pray that that's very successful, that he stays healthy and safe while he's over there. We do still need help for VBS, and that is coming up starting this weekend. So definitely, if you can help with that, see Eric and Chris Dotson, and they can tell you what still remains that they need some support on. So let's make sure that that gets filled. I was informed of another person to add to our list, a man by the name of Tom Ferris, who's been suffering from cancer. The original chemotherapy and stuff is not working. They're going to switch to a different type of therapy, and he's very concerned about that. We need to kind of keep him in our prayers. Any others that we need to have? Yeah. Okay. Leslie's niece, UTI, very disabled. Need to keep her in our prayers. I know she's been on our prayer list, so mindful of that. Other things or people? All right, if you bow with me then. Glorious Heavenly Father, we are excited to be here tonight to learn more about your will as you reflected it in visions to believers in the past, and to look for things that we can learn from that and apply to our lives to be more pleasing to you. We ask that you be with us in that study tonight, that we will look at it that way. We think of many that aren't able to be with us tonight. We have names that we've just presented that may be here but have had procedures or are going to have procedures, and we ask that all things go well, that there's quick recoveries, and that health returns to each and every one of them in whatever their life they're in and wherever they might be at this point. We know there are many others that are in our daily list, and others that may be on our hearts and minds, and again, even others that you're aware of and we might not be, and we pray the same for them. Be with Scott and others that are preaching your word and preparing missionaries in the mission fields. We ask that you give them success in spreading the word and strengthening Christians, and give them safety and success and health. We ask always for your guidance to do your will. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. All right. So, dreams and visions. We're going to be doing this for about the next 6 weeks, and then we will switch. Scott will take over and we'll be talking about the Gospel of John. So we're not going to go the full second quarter on that, just to give you a heads up on that. But last week, we talked about Ezekiel's third vision in Ezekiel 43. We'd already talked about a couple before that. Obviously, that's how we got to the third vision. But we talked about his third vision that we find there. In that vision, God is shown as returning to Jerusalem from the east. We noted that earlier in the book, it was said that God left and went towards the east. Now he's returning from the east. And so he's coming back to Jerusalem. That's where Ezekiel has his visions place him. He's not physically in Jerusalem. He's in captivity in Babylon, but he constantly is transported back, so to speak, in those visions to feel like he's in Jerusalem. He's picturing those kind of things. So he's returned to Jerusalem from the east. The imagery and the location of where things are happening in his dream, being the temple in Jerusalem, are very much like Ezekiel's first vision, and it's noted that it be that way. And God in this vision to Ezekiel basically says he will return to them. He will return to Jerusalem. If you remember the abominations we talked about a couple weeks ago, all the reasons he had to abandon his temple, to abandon his people that were back in Jerusalem, he says he's going to return, and by the way, the people are going to return to Jerusalem, to the promised land as well. But he says in order for that to happen, there are 2 conditions that I have. One is you got to put away harlotry. That means you got to stop pursuing other gods. That is, you got to stop pursuing those idols. You got to get rid of those. Most of those abominations that we talked about in that other vision were about idols from that. He also said you've got to move the dead kings. And we noted last week that we could be a couple of very evil kings that were buried not in the normal place for kings, but were buried in the garden in their home there, which would be very much close to the grounds of the temple. And we think that's probably what God was referring to. Move those out of there. Not only their dead bodies here in my temple area, but in addition to that, they're evil bodies. They're people that were not followers of mine, that were not true to me. And so I want them taken away. These are my two conditions. If those are followed, then I'm going to return and you'll be able to return as well. But Israel must follow the law of the temple, which is basically to go back and follow the commandments that God set apart, set up his worship the way that it was before, get rid of all the things that were abominations to God and to his worship from that. And so that's basically what we talked about in Ezekiel 43. Any other comments about that particular vision? All right. We moved on to Daniel. We know from earlier study when we were looking at dreams, was known and professed to be an interpreter of dreams. But when he got most of the stuff from God, his came to him as visions. That's the way it was applied. We noted the difference early on. Dreams at night, visions most of the time are during the day. And we said dreams often happen to non-believers, and that's what Daniel was interpreting. But a lot of times when he got the definitions of those things, or he had something that he got directly, he got those as a result of a vision versus a dream, which is what we see most of the believers getting from that. In his second vision, remember in the first vision, that was when he got the answer to Nebuchadnezzar's, okay, I've had a dream. I want you to tell me what my dream was and how to interpret it, because I'm not going to trust your interpretation on its own, because you'll make up something. So you have to be able to tell me the dream. And if you remember, that's when Daniel got his three buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and himself to pray to God, and through a vision, God gave him both the dream and the interpretation of, therefore, to give to Nebuchadnezzar. So he's had one vision that we handled when we talked about dreams. So this is his second vision that we talked about last week in the 7th chapter of Daniel. In that, he has a vision, a dream during Belshazzar's first year. Remember, there was Nebuchadnezzar. This is a different king now of Babylonia. And so this is a dream that he had that first year that guy is reigning from there. In that dream, he has a picture of the four winds coming from the four different directions, and there's four beasts. Very common imagery. We've already seen it. We'll see it some more. As I said, we will not go into Revelation because that would take even a quarter just to do that, but we know that's where a lot of visions occurred. Basically, that's one long vision for the most part. And we see beasts in that. In this, it ultimately is told that these are four different kingdoms that are going to come. And so each one of them is described in a certain way as to what kind of a beast it is. The fourth beast, though, is very interesting, and it's particularly interesting even to Daniel from that, and he wants to know more about that fourth beast because it's described when he presents it to us as being dreadful, terrible, and it also has 10 horns on it. And then all of a sudden, a new, smaller horn comes up, but it pushes basically 3 of the horns out. And we know, of course, those were representative of kingdoms, and the breakdown of the one kingdom that the beast represented to begin with, and then a rise of a different kingdom that forced out, replaced the other 3. We talked about what it could have been last week. I won't go into that this week, but we talked about that. We also see in that vision God being pictured on the throne with everlasting kingdom. We noted that that's really the only time that we really get a picture of God in any kind of seemingly human type of form, where he's able to be seated. We get pictures of him from a hand of God, that kind of thing, but we don't get a whole body kind of concept of him outside of this particular vision from that. But not only does God appear on his throne, but he is set to be an everlasting kingdom. These others that were represented by the beasts, those are temporal. They're going to go away. They're not everlasting. And ultimately, it's God and his everlasting kingdom that's going to rule. And that's where Daniel is seeing all the way into the future, into the times, obviously, of the Messiah and Christianity, where we've got that everlasting kingdom to be a part of. So like we said, 10 horns, there were kings, small horn, another king, filled 3 of them. And then there are talk about a war on the saints until the judgment of the Ancient of Days. And the Ancient of Days, obviously, a representative of God, and that ultimately there's this battle going on between nations and between good and evil, for that matter, all the way up until the judgment day, basically, when God will decide for the saints. There will be a lot of troubles for them along the way, but ultimately the judgment's going to go their way. Daniel took all this in because realized it's not all going to happen while Daniel's alive, and he knows that by the way that it's presented to him. He understands that part of it, and he understands what he's been told as an interpretation of it. I don't think he can fully appreciate that everlasting kingdom and that final judgment. That's still confusing to Daniel in a lot of ways. So he's astounded, he's awed by it in different ways, but it says that Daniel kept the vision in his heart. And we noted that was a lot like Mary did with what her discussions were with God and with what happened with Jesus in the temple at 12 and him saying that I'm going about my Father's business. And she notes that and puts it in her heart, kind of bookmarks that I'll come back to that later. I think more interpretation will happen later. And we'll see that with some of the other visions that we're going to see tonight and next week, where there's very much, and it's presented to him that way, that this is not something you're going to understand. This is going to take a long time before anybody's going to fully appreciate it, and only when it's fulfilled will anybody fully appreciate what the vision's about. And Daniel's situation is certainly that way. What that final kingdom is like and when that's going to happen and what that means, he's not really going to be that sure of, and nobody really will until Jesus comes and sets up his church from that. Any other comments about Daniel's second vision? All right, then. We'll work on our new ones for this week. So we'll start on his third vision, which we see in Daniel chapter 8. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, so it's the same king a few years later, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. He says it's like the one I just saw, the one we just had studied about, that we just were talking about in our summary from that, not the vision that was an explanation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but the one that was shared with him directly without prompting of anything else going on. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking, that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. So he's saying, here I am in one of the ruling places. You remember his key role that he'd been given, that he'd asked for to kind of be a key part of the king's court and help with decisions from that. And I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram which had two horns. Notice it's never a normal animal. It's normal in that you can kind of recognize what it is, but it's unique in some aspect of it. Some characteristics of it are different, and horns are the main way of showing the uniqueness from that. And the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. And I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. So again, what do we see out of that? We see a definite situation of kingdoms again, and a kingdom that's going to go in certain directions. Not able to go, the one direction is basically because there's a sea there. There's nowhere to go over there. They don't ever picture them really going on a boat and going somewhere. It's always going and attacking via land, and so that's where it goes from that. And nobody can uphold it. This is a great kingdom that he's talking about that. He goes on to say, and as I was considering, he's thinking about this over, and what does it mean, and what am I seeing in this vision? What is it representing? Suddenly a male goat came from the west, across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. Okay? So far he's described a relatively normal animal, a male goat, but I know many of them that can travel across land without touching it. But that's what this male goat can do. It goes and it floats above the land, apparently, from that. And the goat had oh my goodness, it's got a notable horn between its eyes. That is not where a goat usually has a horn. And it's certainly not usually one we're going to put out and saying it's notable from that. So now we've got two animals. We've got the ram and we got the goat. You can see things are setting up for a fight. Both of them have horns. That's what you use horns for a lot of times. You can dig up stuff and do some other things with them, but primarily they're a weapon or a defensive mechanism one way or the other, depending on which side of the battle you're on. So guess what? Then he came to the ram that had two horns, which I'd seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. You ever watch those National Geographics or those types of things and see where the bighorn ram or bighorn sheep run at each other to decide who's in charge, or you see that with, elk or moose or all sorts of animals that have horns or antlers, where that's part of what's decided who's dominant, who's the winner. And more often than not, those battles end up with one killing the other, not just winning the battle, but being the survivor of it from that perspective. And if not, the one's probably wounded enough, broken horns or whatever, to make it hard for them to continue on too far after that anyway from that. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him. He's motivated by being very angry. He's just appeared. We have no idea why he's angry at him, but he's angry enough to charge after him and attack him from that. And when he did that, what happened? He attacked the ram and broke his two horns. I told you that's what happens too often. So the one-horned goat breaks off the two horns of the ram from that. And there was no power in the ram to withstand him. The ram did not have equivalent strength and power to stand up to the goat from that. But he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Therefore the male goat grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in its place 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. So, again, what do we see when we see the horns changing out? We see a change of the kingdom. What was one big horn representing one kingdom and one powerful king from that now breaks into 4 smaller kingdoms. Same beast, different situation in the horns. That's what that always signifies to us from that. So it's a representation that as you look at these things, this thing is going to change from that, and so you're going to get some change about how those go. So the ram pushed towards the north. That was the Scythians. The west, it went towards the Greeks. To the south, it went towards the Egyptians. The goat coming from the west. Anybody know what the goat would probably be? Alexander the Great. Our college professor had that answer. So, yeah, it's Alexander the Great is probably what's being represented in that. By the time, I think we mentioned this last week, by the time he reached 30, he had captured all of Asia from that. And Darius, who was in charge, over the other, we thought it was Babylon from that time, endeavored to draw off his captains and from Alexander with bribing him. And he tried to induce some of his friends to even assassinate Alexander the Great. But Alexander found out that, and as a result, there was no discussions of peace. He had nothing in his mind but to totally annihilate Darius, the king, from that. And so he wanted to destroy Darius and his whole empire. So Darius was seized, made prisoner by some of his own treacherous subjects, and then afterwards he was murdered from there. So that's our goats from that. And obviously, we said before, King Alexander the Great's kingdom broke into 4 pieces. We'll talk about that a little more in some more of the other visions, but we'll say that much about it now. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and towards the glorious land. And it grew up to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the hosts and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices. And he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. So his vision is saying a lot of bad things are going to happen to the Jewish people, right? Then he's going to cast some down. Not only that, but he is going to stop the daily sacrifices to God. That's not going to happen anymore from that. And so that's, in fact, something that ultimately did happen. And that one of the kings that rose up banned it, one by the name of Antiochus. Probably correct me on the saying of it. But anyway, he did rise up and he banned having sacrifices for quite some period of time from that. And so the full control that came out of that was very limiting and very impactful to those in Jerusalem, well, in Israel, wherever the Israelites were at. The length of the event then gets defined. And then Daniel, in his vision, heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one that said to a certain who was speaking. Obviously, we think probably those holy ones are angels in this case that are talking back and forth. He will be one of the few that names some angels, but not here. And he says, a certain one who is speaking, how long will the vision be? How long is this event going to happen? How long are the people going to suffer under this situation? How long is that going to be the state of things? Concerning the daily sacrifices, we want to get those back. How long are we not going to be able to have those? Then end the transgression and desolation, just basically the evilness that's going to go on from that. The giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot. How long are we going to just be under this tyrannical rule that doesn't allow us in any way to worship God, or for these people to worship God? And he gets the response. And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed from that. 2,300 days, that is 6 years, 110 days. We're not really sure how that figures out to things. We talked about the person who banned it from being able to have the daily sacrifices, but that ban under them was in place only 3.5 of those years, that was actually in place as a official decree, if you will, from that. But in any case, it's going to be that way. And the cleansing, if you're going to see the cleansing of the temple, that waited until Judas Maccabeus. If you think about the Maccabeans, Judas Maccabeus is the one credited with then going back and cleansing the temple after that period of time from there. But the point is, it's going to be a while, but it will not be forever. And that's basically the answer from it. It's going to not be here soon, but it's not going to not happen for you either from that. Then it happened when I'm going to remind you who I am, even though it's my book by my name, I'm Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking its meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. So now it's got beings talking to each other, but now I've got one that looks like a man. I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ilai. I remember that's where he had been, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So now we've got a specific name being made to one of the people that are in the conversation, Gabriel. We'll talk about that in a moment. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. What would be our reaction if an angel, some kind of being came up to us that's been going on in our vision or whatever? I think we'd have that same thing. Part of it might be worship, part of it's just plain fear out of such an interesting situation that we found ourselves in. But he said to me, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and stood me upright. Well, that was kind of interesting because it says I was asleep, which would make this more of a dream than a vision. That's a technicality. True or not true, doesn't really matter, or whether that's just part of the vision, it doesn't really matter from that. The time of the end, one could try to assume that's the time of the end of times, but probably in this case it's the end of this event that he's talking about, in that time period of when they're not going to be allowed to sacrifice daily and those types of things is more of what that end probably is from that. But he's telling him a little bit, this is something that's coming in the future. It's not going to happen tomorrow for you from that. Now I said we'd talk about Gabriel a little bit. He is one of only 2 angels that are named in the Bible from that, and he is spoken about a couple of times, and he gets more joyous news than, well, this isn't horrible news, but a little bit more joyous news. He is the announcer of births. That's kind of been his job from that. In Luke chapter 1, verse 19, and the angel answered and said to him, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God and was sent to speak to you and bring you these glad tidings. Speaking to John's dad, John the Baptist's dad. All right, Zacharias. And then in chapter 1, 26 through 27, and now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city in Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And what was his message? You're going to have a child by the Holy Spirit. You're going to have the Messiah from that. So Gabriel is a pretty significant name from that, but about the only other time we see him is here when he appears in Daniel's dream from that. We may assume some other places, but for the most part, that's where we see him come up from that. So, Gabriel, whoever, explains to Daniel a little bit more about the dream he's just had. And he said, look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation. For at the appointed time the end shall be. The ram which you saw having 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. The Persian Media, the Medes and the Persians, right? Going to end that kingdom that they're under, which is, again, a shock in many ways because it seems so impenetrable at this point. And the male goat is, where is Alexander the Great coming from? From the kingdom of Greece, the Grecian Empire that will come into place. And the large horn that is between its eyes is the first king, Alexander the Great. As for the horn and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. There's 4 different people that's going to get broken into. When you look into Alexander the Great, and I may or may not cover it later, his family, very tragically, one way or the other, pretty much wiped out. If you want a soap opera, we're going to get into that in one of the other visions from that, but that would be Alexander the Great's following after that. People marrying, poisonings, killings, babies, everything kind of occurs in that whole situation from that. And so he says they're not going to have the same amount of power from that. They're just not going to be the same as Alexander the Great. For one thing, they're never going to have as much dominion because they broke it into 4 pieces. Those are his 4 generals that are going to get it because his family kind of, like I said, kills itself off. And then in the latter time of their kingdom, as 4 as they are ruling their pieces of it, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Of course, where does power come from? It comes from God. If you've got power as a kingdom, and when kingdoms have punished the Israelites, God put them into that place and used them for that purpose from that. So ultimately, it's not their power, his power, but he will have mighty power from that. And he shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. So he's saying it's even going to be, he's going to be egotistical enough to try to rise up against God, ultimately. But that's never going to be enough. He's not going to be able to do that. He will be broken. And by not human means, what other means are there? God. God's going to break him. Not a man, but God's going to ultimately break him. He might use men to do it, but it's going to be God that's able to do that from that. And the vision of the evenings and the mornings, indicating this was over a period of time, which was told is true. Meaning this will happen. That's what that always means when it's put up with a vision, when it talks about it being true. It's going to happen. It's not just something that might happen. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. The idea is that, seal up. Don't share it with a bunch of people because you don't have the full explanation of it because you're not there. It's going to happen so long from now that you can't define that. They're going to want to know, okay, who is that final king and when's this going to happen? And I'm not sharing that with you. You're not going to live long enough to know about that. So it doesn't really do much good to tell everybody about it and do a lot about it talking about it. So seal it up, write it down, that's good, but don't make a big deal and preach about it. Try to change anybody right now in this particular case. And the result of him hearing that, and I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. Afterward I rose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. Wait a minute. The angel just described it to him and explained it to him. Yeah, but again we have that part that's very futuristic that is difficult to appreciate and understand. Right? The kings that have come up to begin with, I get that. It's going to be 1, and it's going to be 4 that replaces that, but that final part, that's not easily understood and appreciated. It certainly didn't ever pan out the way that people thought it would, did it? Did people see a Messiah like they got? Did they see one that sacrificed his life on a cross, or did they see one that was going to rule like Alexander the Great? Right? So they're never going to fully appreciate it at that period of time, and many times not going to appreciate it until after it's happened, and they look back and say, oh yeah, that's what that meant, and that's a fulfillment. Another cross that off that we have seen the Messiah from that. And it affected him enough with the worries about what it would mean to him currently and what it meant to his people, and just being upset about the whole thing, that he felt just sick to his stomach about the whole thing. I mean, he had also the onus of knowing something that virtually nobody else knew about what was going to happen and how things were going to go down, and the pressure of knowing all that stuff. So it affected him physically knowing that information from that. So, questions to ask ourselves: who had the dream or vision? Vision in this case, it was again Daniel, in the book of Daniel. What was the situation when it occurred? He's just minding his own business. You know, he didn't ask for it. It wasn't like he did with the first vision when he asked to be told what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was and whatever. He didn't ask a question and say, hey, God, what's going to happen in the future? You know, what's going to happen to this kingdom when it's going to happen? It was something that God chose to tell him at that particular point in time and share with him in the future. The content of his dream vision was to get, you know, a real lay of what's going to happen historically down the road with regards to, number one, kingdoms here on earth, and ultimately the ultimate eternal kingdom at the end of it. And that's what basically the content was, with imagery involved and not just words from that. The purpose of that was, again, to enlighten him and to be able to, you know, historically lay that down. So again, when you get to the point where Jesus is on the scene, you can go back and you can say, Daniel said this happened in a vision. I can put people to that. I can put kingdoms to that. I can follow that all down the line and say, Jesus is a fulfillment of prophecy, just like Alexander the Great was a fulfillment of the prophecy from that. And so it proves another evidence. Not that we had to have it, but it's good to have those kind of things. And it was part of his general plan that evidence be applied as well, and that foreknowledge be out there for people to be able to take in to the level that they were able to do that. Other comments about this particular vision by Daniel?
It amazes me in verse 27 where he says, I was astonished that no one understood it.
Yeah.
I can't explain.
No. But that would be really a hard thing, wouldn't you? I mean, particularly, he's been an interpreter of dreams, and his goal has been to tell people, what does this dream mean? He's had a vision, and he doesn't know what it means. That's you know, for a guy that's, you know, everybody's expecting. In this case, they don't know about it, so he's not got that pressure on him, but it's like, why do I have this, and I can't understand exactly how it's going to play out, because he can't really have an appreciation for the, like I say, the ultimate end of what's coming for the kingdom ultimately that's everlasting from that. But it is interesting, isn't it? It's hard being a prophet sometimes, and not just because people tried to kill you, but sometimes having the burden of what you knew and didn't know as a result of what God shared with you. All right, let's go to a final vision that Daniel had, starting in chapter 10, basically goes 10, 11, 12, finishes out the book of Daniel in that. In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, so he's moved on to the third king of the area, a message was revealed to Daniel. So again, he's going to get it. Again, he didn't ask for it, but God is sharing something with him. And he now mentions, which he doesn't often do, he mentions his Babylonian name. He says, whose name was called Belshazzar. That's what he had been given as his name. Now, interestingly, his three friends, we most of the time hear them by their Babylonian names. But in the case of Daniel, we normally hear him by his Jewish name and not by his Babylonian name. But he's writing the book. He can choose who he wants to call whom, I guess. The message was true. Again, what does that mean? The message is going to happen. This prophecy is going to happen. It's guaranteed. It's not just a might be. It's not a speculation of what could happen. It's going to happen. And the appointed time was long. What does that mean? It's going to be well down the future. Much like the vision he just had, at least the latter part of it, this is going to happen well into the future. He's not going to live to see the end of this one. He's not going to see it fully realized and the vision play itself out. And he understood the message. That'd be comforting. After he couldn't understand the last one, and it made him sick, it'd be better from that if he now gets that, if he understands this one from that. But in those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant food, no meat or wine came into my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. Now, many think that this was basically just 3 weeks following the vision that we just had, and that he is still going through that period of mourning the fact that he can't understand completely the vision he just got, and that's the mourning he's kind of going through. But he's saying here, basically, I'm not eating the normal food you're eating. Most of them believe that those words are saying that he's not eating pleasant food, that he was basically just eating unleavened bread. In whatever case, he wasn't having the normal meal that you would have. He wasn't having, meat, and wasn't having wine with his meal. He was pretty much having water and bread is basically what he was having from that during this 3-week period. And he also chose during this time not to cleanse himself, to anoint himself, to basically take baths and stuff like that. He probably wasn't one you wanted to be around too much. A lot of stomach growling and smelly, and probably a little bit gruff with just lack of the food that he wanted to eat from that. So he probably wasn't a pleasant person to be around. In any case, that was for 3 weeks that he did that. He just finished that when all of a sudden he gets this other message. Now, he didn't do it to get the message, but that's the state we find Daniel in when he gets it, that prompts him into that from there. So it's much like I said, tied to what we finished in the previous chapter, the one we just had from that in 8:27. And the last verse that we were in there said, if you don't remember, it said, "And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. Afterward I arose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it." So again, speculation. We don't know that it followed that immediately, but it might well have done that. That would explain why he was mourning. He's certainly mourning, and we think, from best you can tell, not for himself, but for his people. And so that's why it's such a significant mourning that he's going through, and so ceremonial about the level to which he's taking it. So continue on in Daniel chapter 10. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, that is the Tigris. Notice he spends a lot of time by rivers. But then again, if you've been in that area, that's the only place that's really fertile. You kind of want to be there. It's a little cooler, a lot nicer. So that's not uncommon to be down by the river somewhere, by the riverside, I guess. I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen. Means nice clothes. That's usually going to be your angels and stuff like that. That's when you dress up kind of that. When David danced and stuff, and the others, when they brought back the ark, for instance, they were dressed in linen from that. And that's what they wore, most of them in the temple and those types of things when they went in the Holy of Holies, those kind of things. Whose waist was girded with gold of Upaz or Ophir, basically the same place from that, where everybody kind of recognized you got your best gold out of. His body was like beryl. We talked about beryl as a color last week, a gem. Didn't have rule down it, but there is the idea. It's probably like Tarshish's, the beryl you get from Tarshish. His face like the appearance of lightning. We've seen that in the imagery before, both beryl and the lightning from that. His eyes like torches of fire. Again, we've seen a lot of fire with the images in the past of God particularly. And his arms and feet like burnished bronze in color. That too is very common to what we've seen in previous visions by various people. And the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. The prophets are always working very hard to explain what does that sound like. It's not to say, hey, it's a really deep bass voice that we're hearing, or it's a high soprano, That's not what it gets. How do I express how it is to hear God speak, or the people that are with God? And so his presentation this time, we've seen it sometimes talking about rushing water, like it's coming over a waterfall. In this case, it's like a multitude of people are talking at the same time. It's that loud, that big din of it. It's a noise coming from it. And you definitely can't not hear it because it's very loud to hear. You can't miss it from that. However, what does he say then? He says, "And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision." All right, well, okay. "For the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great terror fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves." We'll talk about what that reminds us of, that little scenario there. I think everybody's probably, a lot of you at least, have got in your mind, hey, wait a minute, that sounds very familiar. Yeah. But he's saying when they're there, they couldn't see the vision. Apparently they could not necessarily hear. Maybe they could hear the rumbling like a multitude, but they didn't hear the words that Daniel was hearing from that. They didn't see what Daniel was seeing from that. But whatever they could sense of it was frightening to them. And so they're fleeing away from it. They left, Daniel, you handle this, buddy. You get to deal with it. We don't want to have any part of it. We're not going to be here to support you. We're going to be somewhere over there. Tell us about it after the fact. And that's the way the people of Israel were. You remember with Moses. When God tried to speak and let them hear that, they said, wait a minute. We're happy, Moses. You go meet with God. Come back and tell us what he said. It's scary when he talks. And we don't really hear his words, but it's really scary when he makes noise. And that fire thing, I'm tired of that thing. It's just frightening. Please, you do that for us. And this is the case. They didn't even offer that to Daniel. They just left him, ran away. So Daniel's there alone when he saw that great vision. And Again, it's so frightening. It takes so much from him. What's his situation? Let alone he's not been eating a really strengthening diet of food. So what is it? And no strength remained in me. For my vigor was turned to frailty in me, and I retained no strength. Like I say, he hasn't been eating to be really strong. He hasn't been eating everything. He hasn't got that protein to give him energy and those kind of things because of what he's been doing. So he's been, sustaining himself, but not much more than that. And now you have, this awesome event happening that's so awesome that the rest flee from it. And even though we can hear the words, he's, the last one left me not understanding, and I was sick for a while. I'm really excited about a new one. Thanks God, I really needed another vision. That last one was tough enough on me. Not that he's not thankful for it, but I'm sure that's part of what's taking it from him from that. Yet I heard the sound of his words, and while I heard the sound of his words, I was in a deep sleep on my face. Right? Like we saw before, was it, or is that talking about the fact of it being more of a vision? Or does it mean it's a dream? Whatever, really not that important. With my face to the ground, and that's really more of a reflection of that humility, bowing down to that great voice. He knows God's involved in that, and he doesn't want to look up necessarily to see God in that. He's going to show his humility in that, his honoring of God and his role, the awe that God's provided in him. And suddenly a hand touched me, which made me tremble on my knees and the palms of my hands. I don't know, if I heard a great ground-sounding voice and the picture of the being that we just saw a moment ago, and it's all of a sudden I felt a touch on me, that would probably make me weak in the knees. It's kind of like when you go into the haunted house and you have something touch you on that, then you're going to freak out. In this case, you're just, scared by it, and he becomes weakened by it from there. So it's had quite an impact on him just at the start of that without really talking about what it is he's hearing, just the mere presence of it and where it's going to go, from that. Now, it's talking about the general situation, whether you recall that or related somewhere else. Of course, we see that in Acts with Saul at that time, right? Saul's on his way to Damascus. He's going to go there and do something about the Christians, and he's got that edict from the Sanhedrin to do that with him, and it said in 22:9, and those who were with me, Paul saying this, indeed saw the light and were afraid, but they did not hear the voice of him who spoke to me. So it sounds a lot like the people that are there with Daniel. They heard something or saw something that put them afraid, but they could not hear God's voice. They did not hear what was being said to Saul, nor did they hear what was being said to Daniel. So we see that same situation repeated there in the New Testament from that. So continue on back in Daniel in verse 11. And he said to me, that vision that we had, O Daniel, man greatly beloved. Wow. Now there's some good words you'd want to hear. I mean, friend to God, and some things that are said about David and some things that are said about Abraham. There's some great words used with them. These are some great words as well. I would, take far less than that from God saying something to me. But man, that's got to be a great thing. Man greatly beloved. You're greatly beloved. I really love you. I care about you. You've been very faithful. You carry stuff out in the face of whatever has been thrown at you from that. What do I want you to do now? Understand the words that I speak to you. I didn't come here for you to, be too afraid to not take these things in. Again, it may not be something you're going to share completely, but I want you to know about it. I want you to be able to document it, to write it down from that. For I have now been sent to you. Stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. Get up off the ground. Now, if he's really asleep, would that have happened? Would he felt the hand? No, I think that's, again, representative of the situation of the vision. And so what happens? While he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling. It's really easy to say, understand, be brave and all that, but, you can get up in that case maybe, but you're still going to have that same feeling about the situation that you're in, and that's what Daniel's got. He stands up at the request, but he stands there trembling from that. And this being said to him, then he said to me, do not fear, Daniel. I can see you're fearful. If I didn't know your heart, I could tell it by the fact that your knees are still clacking together. Your teeth are chattering. What all those things are letting me know that you're still a little nervous and upset about this. You're trembling from that. For from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God. Your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. Does what you say to God in prayer matter to God? It did for Daniel, didn't it? It did for Daniel. God says, either directly or through an emissary here, from that first day when you wanted to understand about me and learn more about me, and you came and humbled yourself before me, didn't put yourself before me, didn't worry about yourself when it came to things like when you're going to be killed and thrown into the lion's den. If you worship something else instead, you continue to worship me. You prayed to me. When you shared your words with me, you asked me stuff, you told me stuff, you shared, I heard those words. And not only did I hear them, but I came because of your words. That's a huge message to all of us. It's a message we see numerous times in the Bible where God shows that a prayer to him brings an answer of yes, that God does hear from that. Even sometimes when they weren't totally faithful from that. We can take Cornelius, who tried in a lot of ways but wasn't even a Jew, and he prayed, and God sent Peter to him. You see that from there. But what a huge confidence builder, you'd hope, Daniel got from that. Not only are you greatly beloved, but God's been listening to you. And God's crediting you with your desire, your commitment to understanding God. And secondly, you've humbled yourself before him. You've not set yourself before. Gus, could he have done that? Well, he was in many ways almost like a Joseph was. He was pretty much arguably the second most powerful man in the kingdom. Right? He certainly was very powerful when he was in the ruling body. He could have been very puffed up about that situation, but he didn't. Whenever he talked about stuff to Nebuchadnezzar or the other king, he always credited God with where that came from, not himself. That's that humility from that. Even in those roles, he came from that. And it caused God to come. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, a second name. Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. Now, that's a difficult one to necessarily fully understand what that means. The prince of the kingdom of Persia, the king at that particular time, is that what it's referring to? I think so, probably. Others think that it's an evil angel, but I think it's probably the king at that point. Withstood me for 21 days, because he's going to be expecting him to do certain things, act on God's behalf, what he wants to have done from that. And, you know, God doesn't make people do things. God, you know, works things to where they are from that. So he indicates here that, you know, I've been there trying to deal with this situation and get kind of him on board with what we want to do for 21 days. That's delayed me a little bit from what I'd like to do. Now, obviously, didn't really delay God. God knows how it's going to happen and knows what's going to occur and when, but he's just kind of saying, I would have liked to have gotten this done earlier. He's been putting that on that many times. I planned for it, but nonetheless. And now one of the chief princes, Michael, came to help me. And we'll talk more about Michael in a little bit. Now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days. All right? He's going to tell him what's going to happen to his Jewish brethren in the future. Again, this is going to be one of those that's not going to be fully carried out in Daniel's lifetime. This is going to have long-term vision, because it says, for the vision refers many days to many days yet to come. It's not going to happen next week, or like I say, within this kingdom. There's more things I'm going to tell you about it, about the future, like I did in the last one. When he had spoken such words to me, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. Again, he's showing his humility with turning his face to the ground. He's bowing his head. That speechless is he's just, you know, in awe. He doesn't know what to say. You know, God is again sharing with him, of all people, he's going to share with him what's going to happen to his people, the promised people, right? His chosen people, rather, from that. And so he kind of just, how do I respond to that? I mean, what do I say? I don't really have anything to say, because he tells me he's going to show me something. I'm kind of going to have to wait till he shows me that something. And so that's kind of the way that it goes from there, is that sharing from that. Michael, then, just like we looked at Gabriel, is mentioned elsewhere as an angel. Isn't necessarily called that way here, but kind of we can surmise that's probably true, based on, again, what kinds of characters are appearing in those. he has named us as an archangel, kind of over some other angels from that perspective. The only person called the archangel in the Bible from that. Some people think Gabriel is one too, but it isn't attributed that way by words that are in there anyway. We find two other places that Michael as an angel shows up. In Jude chapter 1 verse 9, that's where it comes up with archangel. Jude writes, "Yet Michael the archangel, in contending with the devil, when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, 'The Lord rebuke you.'" And we have no idea about that conversation. This is the only time it's mentioned. We know that Moses went up in the mountains to see the promised land. He wasn't allowed to go into it. We know that he died up there and that God buried him. That's all we know from Bible until we get to Jude. And he says that there was a contention between the devil and basically God over what was going to happen with Moses' body. For whatever reason that would occur. I don't know why the devil was interested in Moses' body. Doesn't really matter. But in that case, the being contending with the devil about it was Michael, the archangel, one of the lead angels, if you will, of group leaders. In Revelation chapter 12, 7 through 9, or 7 through 8, really, I'm sorry about the 9, 7 through 8. "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer." So again, we've got Michael, and in this case, he has angels. Very indicative of what we think of an archangel, like I said, kind of a lead angel from that, so he would have a certain group of them under him, and that's kind of what's presented here from that, so same kind of role for Michael in both of these passages from that. In this case, there's a fight between the dragon, which we know to be the devil in Revelation, and his evil angels, basically, and the winning over of that, and that seemingly will go where he was cast down into heaven. This is when he's not allowed to be heaven anymore. There was no room for him and his angels for whatever. But the key is, Michael apparently, again, an angel, better, different than Gabriel, different one, but we don't know anything else really about him. We could speculate, but we don't know, so it doesn't really matter. But that's what's said about him otherwise. So Daniel's the only one that I think that mentions both of the named angels in the Bible, and he mentions both of them here in this one vision that he had. Continuing on in verse 16, "And then suddenly one having the likeness of the sons of men touched my lips." So that's a very common refrain when you're having difficulty. Remember, he was speechless. And so now we remember that we had one case where I'm a man of, iniquity, evilness of sin, and in that case, his lips were touched with a coal. In this case, it's just touching my lips. "Then I opened my mouth and spoke." Basically, healed whatever the problem was from that. "Saying to him who stood before me, 'My Lord, because of the vision, my sorrows have overwhelmed me, and I have retained no strength.'" Very much correlates to the vision he just had, right? The one that we had gone over last week, the one we did earlier today, rather, where it was overwhelming to him. He got sick from that one, and that's what he's saying. It's really got me, and I've not had any strength. I've been frail ever since that. "For how can this servant of my Lord talk with you, my Lord? How is it that I can talk with you? Why am I again worthy enough to have a conversation with you? You may be a messenger of God. That still doesn't make me feel comfortable talking to you. No more, obviously, I don't feel comfortable talking to God if that's who I'm talking to. Either one of them, I'm not worthy of this conversation from that. So how is it that this is happening? And as for me, no strength remains in me now, nor is any breath left in me. And then again, the one having the likeness of man touched me and strengthens me." There's an expectation by God that he's got a job to carry out. You can say you can't do it, but God's going to give you what you need to deliver on that. Right? Moses tried to give God excuses for why he couldn't do something, didn't he? Did God accept any of his excuses? No. He did not. You want a name? I'll give you a name. You want proof? I'll give you some proofs. You don't think you can talk? I'll give you somebody who can talk. By the way, I can make you talk, but that's probably what's mostly going to happen is you're going to talk for yourself or for me ultimately out of that, but I'm not going to take an excuse. You're not strong enough. You're not worthy of it. I'm going to touch your lips so you can talk. I'm going to touch you and strengthen you so you can carry what I want you to carry out. No excuse is going to be taken. None of them is going to carry over. "And he said, 'O man,'" what? "Greatly beloved again. is again going to remind him. He's again going to encourage him. I'm not just talking to you because you're somebody, you just happen to be available right now. And I thought, well, you're not doing anything anyway, so why don't I let him have a vision so he's got something to talk about? No, I'm here because you are greatly beloved. I'm here again because of how you've established a relationship with God. And because of that, you should not fear. Fear not. Peace be to you. Be strong. Yes, be strong. That's a common refrain when we're dealing with God. Remember how that happened with Moses to some extent? Remember it happened very, very, very often with Joshua. Before he went to be in charge and go off with the people to take over the land, it constantly said, be courageous and be strong. God wants you to know that he's there with you. I'm gonna make that happen. You can be strong. You're greatly beloved, and you don't need to be afraid, and don't worry about it. You are strong and going to be strong. And so when he spoke to me, I was strengthened. God will strengthen him and said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. All right, I'm ready now. I've kind of recovered from it. I know that you're with me. You've given me encouragement. I'm ready. Go ahead and speak. Tell me what it is you want to tell me about. Then he said, do you know why I've come to you? Well, I pretty much would guess that Daniel's answer would have been, I have no idea. And I think that's a rhetorical question. He knew he didn't know why he came to him, but he asked him that anyway. And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia, and when I've gone forth, indeed, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these except Michael, your prince. So again, we have a repeat of some people. The prince of Persia, I think is the king at that particular time of Persia from that. The prince of Greece, who was that? We remember? Who comes from Greece? It's Alexander the Great. So he says that, right now we're having troubles with the prince of Persia, but the Alexander the Great's going to come soon enough. And we know how that's going to happen from that. He's saying, I'm telling you what's been noted as the scripture truth. What I tell you is the truth. It is what's going to happen. I know God knows, he doesn't have the limits of times. He knows the past as well as he knows the future, as well as he knows the present from that. It doesn't mean anything to him. Time means nothing to me. And nobody upholds him against these. Nobody helps him with these except Michael, your prince. Reading back to where we saw Michael before. Isn't a new Michael. Michael that we've said most likely was the angel, and the angel that we read about in the latter part of the New Testament from that. Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. So again, this correlates back to what he had told him in the previous vision, right? About how things are going to break down from this. There's going to be more kings within Persia. They're going to break the kingdom up basically from that. And there will be one that's got more than the others. But he's going to try to stir them all up against Alexander the Great. Remember we talked about that just a moment ago. Alexander the Great, where they tried to buy off his leaders, and they tried to do other things to win the battle, and all that did was make Alexander the Great that much madder and that much more committed to wiping them out from that. And he goes, then a mighty king shall arise who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. So again, he's laying out how things are going to go in the future for the kingdom there that he's in now and the other ones from that. And when he is risen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven, but not among prosperity or according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. So basically, he's talking about the situation of what's going to happen to Alexander the Great. When Alexander the Great goes, there's a whole lot of things that happen, like we said, within his family. And ultimately, no family members are left to carry it on from that. So it gets split up from that, divided up from that, and then nobody has the same dominion, the same amount of kingdom that Alexander the Great had. And so his kingdom is ultimately going to be uprooted. It will be replaced by other kingdoms from that. And then he says, also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion from that. There's pretty much agreement that the king of the south is Ptolemy, Lagus, one of the generals. He had the king government that ruled over Egypt, Liberia, those kind of things, south of Judea from that. And then princes that were, he was talking about as Seleucus Nicator, whatever. He owned, possessed Syria, Babylon, Media, those kind of areas, and that's kind of what he's talking about. So you see a lot of correlations. If you take history, looking back at the prophecy and applying it to it, you can see it kind of play out. Haven't heard the buzzers, but I think my time is up, so I'm going to stop here. Any questions, comments, complaints, humorous stories, jokes? All right, we'll pick up with this one next week. That'll finish out Daniel. Then we're going to talk about the shortest book in the Old Testament, which is just one big, because only one chapter, one big vision. And then we'll talk of a man that we have no other record of other than that one book that was written. We don't know who he was. We can't really even say when it happened. And then we'll talk about Habakkuk, again, somebody we don't have a lot of background on. And most of his book is also a vision. So we'll talk about those next week once we finish with Daniel. All right? Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.